You mentioned one thing though that these ideologues in particular were going on about, and it's a phrase that I see. It generates a lot of emotion in people, particularly when they think of. I think a lot of people think about when they hear this, they think of like, Christian Catholic priests doing exorcisms on people and stuff like that. Conversion therapy. It's a term that people they hear it and instantly they have like this knee jerk reaction almost. Could you just give us a little bit of an insight? What is conversion therapy in general or in particular to one issue, whatever it might be?
Well, the term was always used towards practices that are, I mean, deeply harmful and unethical, which tried to kind of forcibly change someone's sexuality. Um, and you did in the past find this in predominantly religious settings, but you could find it in some clinical settings as well. We've seen this in TV series and dramatized in films. It's like electric shock therapy and people, things like corrective rape as well. Like, really, I mean, horrific stuff. Um, Obviously that's all is called by existing legislation. It's not legal to rape or electrocute people.
I was
But
going to say I'd never heard that term corrective rape before. What is that? If you don't mind me asking, corrective rape. That just seems like something that is completely incongruent.
oh yes, I mean, well, kind of it would operate in a way that, let's say, there was a young woman who said that she was attracted to other women, she's a lesbian or whatever. And I've heard stories in the past, that this individual, again, whether it's a religious leader or someone posing as a kind of therapist, would essentially kind of rape them to make them straight. I mean,
Oh,
yeah, it's madness. I mean, human beings have done some pretty horrific things over the years, and thankfully, as I said, this stuff has been long criminalized. Um, and that's kind of just where it was. And conversion therapy in that sense is not legal in the United Kingdom. However, as always, the term is now being twisted. It now includes gender identity, not just sexuality. And the modern version of conversion therapy is essentially referring to either therapeutic conversations between a client and a therapist, or conversations between a religious leader and a member of their congregation. And they're essentially trying to suggest that certain forms of conversation should be criminalized under the guise of conversion therapy if you are trying to suppress someone's gender identity.
hmm. Ah, right. I see. So that's where now you're saying is ideology being pushed as law. So that's where it's coming in. Whereas, yeah, I can see that. So it's not in the same vein as how you would use conversion therapy before, where you're talking about these heinous immoral practices like electric shock therapy and quote unquote corrective rape and all these things, these horrible things. Again, where you're going back to talking about the importance of free speech, now trying to criminalize you or any other therapist for giving advice that you feel would help the person or trying to help the person in some way. But if that goes against or tries to enact some kind of quote unquote conversion therapy against their gender identity, quote unquote, that could now be criminalized. Is that the kind of level that we're talking here?
Yes, and it could even capture concerned parents or family members. Other countries that have passed similar legislation, if a parent doesn't allow their child to medically transition, they can be uh, criminalized as well for having engaged in conversion therapy. So as to the term, it's usually the term suppress, to change or suppress someone's gender identity. And as we were talking about earlier, I mean, gender identity is some kind of not a nebulous concept that's kind of been invented, and it completely and utterly intangible. And so arguably anything that isn't encouraging transitioning could be suppressing gender identity. But so we don't need this legislation because any real harm is already criminalized. And the irony is that, because to convert something is to change something from one thing to another. What myself and some of my colleagues are doing is not trying to change these people, these children. It's trying to get them to accept themselves as they are. The irony is that it's what the other side are doing that's the real conversion, actually trying to change them from something and morph them into something that they're not through strong hormones and surgery.
Yeah, so calling what you guys are doing conversion therapy, when you're actually trying to say no, no, don't convert yourself in a way into this human that is going to have. We've seen horrible cases. Again, going back to the What Is a Woman documentary, which I mentioned before, there was a case in Canada, I'm not sure where a father was told that when the mother, or when the ex-wife it was, took the daughter into the clinic, they were going to start pumping her full of cross-sex hormones within the hour, and he then had to take legal action. And sadly, they did go ahead with it. He wasn't successful. Tried to fight as hard as he could, but again, we are seeing it. And yeah. Would you say that from what I've seen, I see some people put it this way: there's, the difference between sex and gender. So sex being immutable, and then gender being this really nebulous, weird concept, how it manifests and that kind of stuff. Seems that for gender identity, we used to just call that personality. Would you say that?
Yeah, it's that's exactly what it is, and it's completely wrapped up in various forms of stereotypes or assumptions that we make about men and women. I mean, with some of my clients, some of my younger clients, I'm literally saying, to accept yourself and accept your sex does not involve having to change your personality. You keep doing what you want to do. You dress how you want to dress. You wear your hair as you want to wear it. You pursue whatever career you want. You have whatever hobbies you want. You hang out with whoever you want. You don't have to check. Great. This is all part of you. But just because you like doing things or like looking in a way that traditionally is associated, let's say, with men, and you're a woman, it doesn't make you a man. And it's trying to untangle all of this. But you're right. You could just sum it up as personality.
Yeah, seeing that. I can't remember what commentator it was, but he said this: two sexes, zero genders, infinite personalities was a nice way that I've seen it. Encapsulated. But with regards to this, now we're saying that if this legislation and stuff is brought in, what does the future look like to you? Not just in therapy, but as wider as well, with regards to this ideological infestation that have taken place. You mentioned before that some people can't necessarily bring themselves forward because, as you said, they won't be able to keep a roof over their head. These kinds of things, like concerned parents and stuff like that. You've been active on social media at the moment, sharing photos that parents have sent you, I believe, of like pride flags on primary school like fences and stuff like that. Where at the moment, based on what you see now, based on your past experiences, based on everything, where do you see this going? If things were just to continue as they are at the moment.
I think we've made some small strides. No, actually, no, that's not fair. I think we've made some big strides, but with the government we've got in the UK at the moment, I mean, anything is possible. They, as I said, they banned puberty blockers, great, but then you read on and you see that they're allowing unlimited children to trial them. Well, then there's no ban at all in reality. They've shut down the Tavistock, great, but now there's new gender clinics being commissioned, which will also feature some people who had a hand in running the Tavistock. Has anything really shifted there? You had a Supreme Court judgment, the highest court in the land, saying that sex is biological. But you've got schools and other public institutions almost ignoring it altogether and saying that men can still use women's bathrooms. So I'm finding it difficult to really know what's going to actually change society. And I'm not convinced that politicians and law alone can necessarily do it, because it feels like this has become so culturally embedded. I keep saying we need a kind of great reset. I really think we do. I think there has been a contagion that's spread across society, and it has infected a hell of a lot of people. And my biggest concern is that whilst there do seem to be more and more sensible adults in the room at the moment, the current cohort of students leaving secondary school or going to university have spent years being brainwashed with this stuff, and they're going to be the future business and political leaders. And I am concerned that we are going to end up going backwards again in the not too distant future, even if we make some progress now. I hope that's not the case, but so I think if we're actually going to make any real difference, we have to change it from the ground up. I think that we need to eradicate this stuff from nurseries and primary schools and secondary schools, because otherwise we're going to be in this eternal back and forth over this. And I don't see how we'll ever reach a kind of societal consensus. And we do have to try and come back together as a society as well, because I mean, we're very fractured on a lot of issues at the moment. There's a lot of division,
Mm,
but on this issue, I don't know what it's going to take to kind of unify us again. I worry that we'll always be fractured down these fault lines now going forward.
yeah, yeah. There's a thing. I think it's going to take a lot of people, at the individual level is obviously where it's going to start, almost like, looking in the mirror and doing what a lot of people have obviously already done, but a lot of people yet to do. And many people are actively scared to do, almost look themselves in the metaphorical mirror and actually really question what they believe in. Is it true? I think that's what a lot of people have done. And a lot of them, I got to think, like the people that have forced their kids into, say, medical transition, if they were to do that, I think a lot of people now, they've gone to the point where if they've done something that is really reprehensible under this ideology, if they've been taken down this path, it might not have been something they necessarily meant to do, but it was like a logical consequence of them going as far down the path that they have. It's going to be extremely hard for them to be able to face up to what they've done. Like if you have a lot of these celebrities who have, pumped their kids full of cross-sex hormones and tried to raise them as the opposite sex, whatever it may have been, done irreparable damage to them, stunted their growth and, maybe what's other things that have, permanently removed their sexual function and all of these things, the irreparable damage that they've done, it's going to be so hard to face up to that. It's going to be so hard to face up to that for a lot of people. I think for a lot of people, I don't think they've actually done that. It's going to be a lot easier. But for those people, you got to think, will they be able to face up to it? Will they be able to actually take those steps to do it? But then it's going to be exactly as you said there. Once people take that step, then things will start changing societally and culturally. I think there just has to be an acknowledgement of reality, almost acknowledge that objective reality does exist. Because it seems like when you were in university, you would have learned, as I did, about like objectivism, subjectivism, and all of these things. There needs to be an acknowledgement that some kind of objective reality and morality exists. You can't live in this like purely subjective, relative, environment. Do you think that's on the right lines as well?
Definitely. Again, how can you? I mean, we wouldn't have been able to advance to where we have as a species unless we were able to acknowledge some common truths. There is a lot in life that's subjective, but there's a hell of a lot that's objective. And going back to what you were saying earlier about this feeling like it's almost religious in nature, I mean, I've seen that because it doesn't matter what the evidence shows, they continue to push it. I mean, as I said, well, we know and understand how sex works, and it isn't in doubt that sex is binary and immutable. Um, and as I said, we've just had the Supreme Court judgment rule on it from a legal perspective as well. And yes, there are those fervently championing gender ideology, and they haven't changed their opinion one bit. And I still sometimes online get called anti-scientific from my position, which is, I mean, it's the height of irony. And if I didn't laugh, I'd cry. And so, what can you do? How can you get through to these people? I don't think I don't think it's possible, actually. In part, possibly because of what you said, which is that I'm not sure they can necessarily own up and acknowledge how badly they got this wrong and how many lives they've destroyed as a result. But
Mm.
for some, I don't know. I, I think it's a combination of people, innocent people, being caught up in a trend. I think it's some people who have nefarious motives and really do want to kind of inflict chaos on society. And I think there's others who are just desperate to be seen as decent people and want to get ahead in life, and they think this is the way to do it. And I've always said I don't particularly care what personal reason someone has had for pushing this ideology because the outcome is the same every time.
Hmm. Yeah, it's exactly the same. Like, no matter whether they did it because they were taken up by it, they were innocent person taken up by it, or they were actively pushing it, or they've just put their son in a dress, whatever it is, or they've, gone and maybe they went and bought a chest binder, or they did pump them full of cross-sex hormones. No matter, at the end of the, all paths are going to lead to Rome, so to speak. No matter what path you're on, no matter what stage you're on at that path, is all going to lead pretty much to the same logical conclusion. And yeah, it does make you wonder. There are going to be some people who you're able to get through to. I think that's why is it important? Going back to free speech again and stuff like that. Because at least with being able to speak openly, speak freely, and have open debate, have open discussion, there's that section of people in the middle that are confused or not sure what to do that you can actually reach. So I think it's commonly told like you have a third on one side, you have a third on the other side, that they're never going to reach each other, but you have that third, or you have that 40%, whatever it is, in the middle that are going to sway votes. Like in America, you have like the swing states and stuff like that. That those are the people whom you really want to try and reach. They're actually people that will be open, they'll listen. And a lot of times I think many of those people at least will go towards where the stronger evidence lies, because that's what will get through to the majority of people. But yeah, when we're focusing on tailoring our efforts to try and expose what this ideology is, what it really teaches, even like it still shocks me, I think, how many people don't know the history behind gender ideology and stuff like that, going back to like Kinsey and John Money and people like that, and the horrific things that they did. I think a lot of people just learning that will pull them, decently far towards the other side. Learning about the horrific experiments that led to this, and the are you familiar with the Reimer twins?
Unfortunately, yes.
Yeah, the Reimer twins.
Yes. But I always say that you don't need to. Well, maybe my wife would disagree with this, but I always say that I don't need to put much spin on things because the facts kind of speak for themselves. All we really need to do is present the truth of what's going on out there, present the case studies, present the evidence and the material. And people, as you say, often pretty horrified by what that's. Just going back to what we were saying about parents. I mean, there are some parents who I believe are kind of it's like Munchausen syndrome by proxy. I mean, they are actually benefiting, and they are getting off on their children being different and unwell, and being able to kind of live that life, championing them. But for many parents, they don't know what to do, because the narrative has been. I mean, it's slowly changing now, but the narrative has been for such a long time that if you don't affirm your children to transition, they're probably going to kill themselves, or else, at the very least, they're going to want nothing to do with you, and they're going to kind of disown you as their parents. And parents are so fearful of this, and no one likes to see their child suffering. And so sometimes parents have gone along with this stuff, later regretted it, but in the moment they felt that they were doing what they could do. And I've got a huge amount of sympathy for parents caught in that position, because it's a horrific thing to have your child come home from school one day and say, we've been learning about gender identity and stuff like that at school, and I think I'm born in the wrong body, and I think I'm not the daughter you thought you had. I'm actually your son, and from now on you need to call me XYZ. And by the way, I want to take medication which will render me infertile. I mean, it's such a horrible thing for a parent to be confronted with. And even if the parent says no, the child will just go on to some of these online communities or reach out to some of these activist groups that we were talking about earlier and try and do it anyway. So I have a lot of sympathy for parents who are in this position as well. And the parents get missed in a lot of this. It's pretty traumatic for the parents themselves, actually.
Yeah, absolutely. And I speak to that a lot of struggles with mental health myself growing up. When I was a kid, I'm very lucky that this wasn't as big as it was when I was a kid. When I was going through my mental health struggles and stuff like that, because I put my parents through enough hell as it was. And you mentioned there, the sad thing is that obviously they told that, I believe it was like, would you rather have a living daughter or a dead son, or like a living son or a dead daughter, those kinds of things that they told. Well, and I believe Jordan Peterson was one of the ones that came out and said it was one of the most destructive lies that was ever told. And there was a research paper, I can't remember the author's name, I talked about it on a podcast a long time ago, and it showed a really troubling trend, which was that if you basically just left kids alone in this period, especially when they're going through like the late childhood into early teens, and as they're growing up and getting older, I think it was like 98% of them just naturally grew out of it. And then you had some of them that would escalate. But another paper come out, and it was troubling that a lot of these institutions, as you mentioned, when children were put in these institutions, the outcomes in many instances seem to get worse than if they were just left out of the institutions and were allowed to go along their natural progression through their age with their family and stuff like that. And that's why I think, again, a lot of this is very, very sinister. But you are right. The parents, some of them, they have this again, some kind of prestige that they feel they can gain from it, this kind of status symbol that they have. But a lot of them, and I know a lot of them reach out to you from things that you post on X, is that a lot of them are very, very scared almost, and very concerned with what their children are learning, and are not sure where to turn to. So that's why they'd be thankful for people like yourself who are able to speak on these things, and do have a large following to make these aware. And I know you've been blocked by no end of schools, you've been blocked by no end of institutions for calling them out. But I think they say sunlight is the best disinfectant, right? They say sunlight is the best disinfectant for a lot of these things. Do you have any, for parents listening to this and are just, concerned, maybe their kids are coming home and they're saying about this now, whether it's like, oh, we learned this in school today, or they're coming home to their dad saying that, like, the son's coming home to the dad, like, oh, dad, I think I'm a girl, these kinds of things. Obviously, with it being it's going to be specific case to case basis with therapy and stuff like that. That's obviously a given. But do you have any general advice for just any sort of concerned parents that are listening at the moment that might just be concerned about what their kids are being taught and what's put into their heads?
I think, I mean, it's a shame, it's a necessity, but I think all parents should actually make themselves aware of what their children are being taught, particularly under the guise of kind of, sex education or diversity education. Go and actually request the materials and have a look at them themselves and form a judgment. There's a lot of parents I speak to are in kind of battles with the school faculty trying to stop certain things being taught at all because it's just so utterly inappropriate. I mean, if a kid comes home and says they think they're trans, I think as a parent, you've got to try and strike the right balance. I think you've got to reaffirm your love, your love and support and care for that child, because they do need to hear that. They also need to hear some home truths, and they need to hear what's real and what isn't, and delivered in a respectful and measured way, not flying off the handle, not ripping your hair out, not shouting about it. But, adults, parents are there to teach their children about some of the facts of life, and this is no different to that. I think just keeping it measured, ensuring that there's dialogue about this, always being there to talk to them about it, because, again, if the child doesn't feel that they can have at least an open conversation, then they're going to turn elsewhere to people who've potentially got nefarious motives. But certainly don't indulge. It's a slippery slope, and some parents could say, well, it's what's in a name or what's in a pronoun. We've seen from the evidence that social transitioning is the first step towards medical transitioning. So you cannot indulge it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.